Welcome to Hustle and Flow with Heather Hubbard, episode number 58. Hi, I'm Heather Hubbard, and I was a litigator, partner, and practice group leader at an AmLaw 200 firm. I know what it takes to rise to the top. I also know all too well the toll it can take on your personal life. So how do you shine bright without burning out? How do you embrace your ambition without selling your soul? You're listening to the Hustle and Flow podcast. Welcome back. I am your host, Heather Hubbard, and I am so excited that you are joining me today. If you have not heard, we are doing the Get It Done Challenge, April 2nd through the 6th. And what that means is we are really kickstarting the second quarter. We are clearing out, the first quarter and really building up some momentum. So if you're overwhelmed, if your to-do list is way too long and you're just feeling like I can never get in charge of my schedule, we're going to do this together for a week. We will do a podcast each morning. There will be a challenge and a prompt for you, and then a Facebook Live every afternoon. And those that participate, there will be a daily prize. And if you participate all 5 days, you are eligible for the grand prize. And I'm still not in a position to tell you what that is, but it's going to be good. So even if I don't do what I originally was going to, which is going to be expensive, it's still going to be so worth your time. You're going to love it. You definitely want in on this. So go to getitdonechallenge.com, enter your name and email address, and I will make sure that you get emails each day with the prompts so you know exactly what to do. One, so you can have a week of really getting back on, taking over your day, your week, getting your life back, and to make sure that you are eligible for all of those amazing prizes. Okay, today we are talking about the disease to please. And I had never heard this phrase before, but I loved it. So I thought we should talk about it. Goop, Gwyneth Paltrow's company, which by the way, I've always noticed people love her or hate her. I really don't feel strongly about it because I don't follow it, but I saw that she had a new podcast and Oprah Winfrey was her first guest. And so I was like, yeah, I'm going to listen to that because I love Oprah. By the way, I never watched her when she was on. I always thought highly of her, but mostly become a fan as I have been personally enlightened myself. So now I get what she's saying. Anyway, I listened to that first podcast and it's like an hour and 10 minutes. It's long, but oh my gosh, it is so good. I needed to hear so many different things that they talked about. And it was so good. And I shared it on social media. So if you follow me on Instagram or Facebook, and by the way, if you don't, you should. My handle, I guess you would call it, is Heather Joy Hubbard. So come hang with me there. But I posted on there, it was like, oh my gosh, you have to go listen to this right now. And I had a few different people say, there goes my productivity. Thanks for wasting, an hour of my day. And I'm like, guys, it's not going to waste your day. And this is like productivity for the soul, body, mind, and soul. So it is not wasted time. It is so good. I'm saying this to let you know, if you've not listened to this podcast yet, you need to go listen to it. The podcast is Goop, and it's the very first episode with Oprah. So good. Anyway, Oprah was talking about this disease to please. And obviously, I'm super familiar with people pleasing because I suffer from the condition, and I talk about it all the time on our podcast, but I had never heard that phrase. And I then did a little Googling, and there's a book out about it. I guess she's been using this phrase for a long time. So some of you guys are probably thinking, Heather, come on now, get with it. But it was new to me. And I thought, how is it that we've never done an episode on people pleasing? I mean, I talk about it all the time on the podcast and with my coaching clients and my workshops and my, presentations. And I thought, we need to do a podcast on this. And because I just heard disease to please and love it, that's the title. So let's talk about this disease. I suffer from it. Most of my clients suffer from it. In fact, I'm trying to think, I definitely have worked with a few people that don't suffer from this, but it seems like most people do. And I have some thoughts on it. So I want to talk about first, how does this happen? How do we acquire this disease? And I'm using quotation marks, but it truly is, right? How do we get this? I think there are 3 reasons why we suffer from this. And by the way, this is just my opinion. It is based on personal experience and working with many others, but I have no research to back this up. So just putting that out there. Okay, number 1, it comes from our family, the way we were raised. Number 2, it comes from our culture, the way that we were really raised by our communities, by the media, by our churches. And 3, I do think it's somewhat related to our personality. And I think lawyers share certain, things personality-wise, and that leads to it. So let's talk about that last part first. Let's talk about the personality piece. In my mind, when I think of the personality that tends to be a people pleaser, it comes from being a high achiever. So often at times, if we are high achievers, and most lawyers are, it means that we're pretty good rule followers. Now, there are always outliers. I would bet that the outliers aren't people pleasers. So when you're a high achiever, it means that you know how to go to school. You know how to go to church. You know how to go to an organization, basically anything, and get a pat on the back. You know how to get the gold star. And you get the gold star by pleasing others. Follow me here. Even if you're in school and you're getting good grades, it's still because the teacher or the school board or someone has set the standards for what it looks like to be a good student. They have determined, the subjects that matter. They've determined the way that you should test. They say, to succeed in life, you have to study and do your homework. That may or may not be true, and we can actually think of a lot of examples of people that were dropouts and they're now millionaires, right? It's not necessarily a reflection of how successful you're going to be, but that's drilled in us. And so we're able to say, yeah, I can do that. I can mimic what you're saying I need to do. And that in and of itself is pleasing others. And it feels good when we get the A's. It feels good when we get the recognition or the awards. It feels good when we are the teacher's pet. I'm sure a lot of us were accused of being brown nosers growing up. We know the rules. We're happy to play by the rules. And we love the praise and the attention that we get from achieving and succeeding. But again, keep in mind, you're achieving and succeeding according to other people's terms, which means at the end of the day, what you're doing is simply falling in line and pleasing the person that has set the standards. So again, I think that's why a lot of attorneys suffer from this, is because this is where we get our affirmation. This is where we get our motivation, is by others telling us we're doing a good job, by patting us on the back, by letting us know that we're on the right track. And again, we're not really thinking for ourselves all the time. We're just working for that next promotion, that next award, to please others, because that essentially then pleases us. Okay? Lawyers aside, I think this also comes from, like I said, family and culture. I'm going to kind of lump these together, but part of it is the positive reinforcement. So even if you're not a high achiever, you still probably experienced this. And that is that when you did something that pleased your parents, or when you did something that pleased your teachers, or you did something that pleased others, even if it was not in the form of grades or something else, maybe it was because you wrote them a sweet note, or you helped out in the kitchen, they give you positive reinforcement, as they should, right? I mean, this is also how, you train dogs. When you give them that positive reinforcement, because most of us want to feel good, we're like, oh, okay, more of that. If I do more of that, you're going to say nice things to me. If I do more of that, you're going to be happy with me. And when you're happy with me, I'm happy with myself. And so our happiness then is derived from what pleases our parents. Now, I did a lot of things that did not please my parents. And I do think there's this natural tendency to push against that, right? I think especially right in the teenage years when, parents and children just are not getting along. I think part of that's probably because the kids are like, I want to just do my own thing and I want to be okay. I want to be worthy. I want to be valuable just for being here. And that's when they really start to push back and say like, well, why do you get to set the rules for what's good and what's bad? And so again, I think that that's just what trains us to please. On the opposite side of that, there are negative corrections. So if you do something that does not please your parents or your teachers, there's some kind of negative correction. And, it might be a consequence, but it might not be. Because again, because you're following other people's rules, sometimes we need rules. There's nothing wrong with rules, and there should be consequences when people don't follow them. But what if the rules aren't really legitimate? And what if you don't agree with the rules? It creates major conflict. We don't really know how to process that. But from a negative correction place, you probably heard this. I certainly heard this. If you had to do something that you didn't want to do, right? And by the way, for all you parents out here, you're probably like, well, I say that. You say things to your kids like, I definitely heard it growing up. You have to do things you don't like. Just because you don't like it doesn't mean you get out of it. Suck it up, right? Or it's good for you. It's good for you. This is what makes you a good person, a good citizen. This is something you just have to do in life. It's part of being an adult. Don't be so selfish. You're being selfish. That's not very polite. You need to show more respect. That's not ladylike. You need to have a bigger heart. You need to help others. I don't know if any of that's ringing a bell for you guys, but this comes from not only our families, but like I said, our communities. And, in the church that I was raised in, it was on the women to serve and help others. And I think that even if you didn't go to church, you probably can still think of this like in family settings or organizational community settings where the women are there to serve. And that's, everything from cooking meals to serving the meals to, helping with the kids to washing the dishes to preparing the event, planning the event, cleaning up after the event, or hiring people to help with the event, collecting the donations, and then delivering the donations, going to help the elderly, going to help the sick. That is what women were supposed to do. And if you didn't want to do it, or you were like, why are we doing this? Or why can't the boys be helping? You would generally get pushback. And from a religious perspective, you were told this is how you help and serve. And so if you don't want to help and serve, then, you're sinning. There is something wrong with you. But even outside the religious context, when you just think of all those messages in general, right, about how it's good for you. Think about it from the perspective of visiting grandparents. And you're like, and maybe as a kid, you really don't want to go, right? You're like, I don't want to go. Maybe for hours at a time, or you're going to a nursing home. You don't want to go. And you're told, don't be selfish. This is good for you. You're going to regret this one day. Basically, what you're being told is if you don't want to do something and you should be doing it, then you are a bad person, right? So it's important to please others, even if it means that you are not happy yourself. And I think part of this, again, is cultural, because when I talk to, I was getting ready to say adults as if I'm not an adult. But when I think of the generation above me, when I think of my parents, my aunts, my uncles, my grandparents, people that age, I still hear them say things like this. The world has gotten so selfish. Everybody is just looking out for themselves. No one is helping others. And so there's just this ingrained belief that you should constantly sacrifice your own happiness for the well-being of others. So of course that was passed on to us. Of course our parents are going to pass that on to us if that's what they were taught. But here's the thing. We get to choose whether or not we agree with those values. We get to choose whether or not we agree with those rules. And most of us, we just don't stop to do that. It's why so many of us feel so strongly about things. And we have these values, but they may not even be our own. We just adopted them and took them with us without ever saying, well, do I really believe that's true? And where did that come from? Like, why do I believe that? Why do I believe that? This is why, they always do these like election polls in elementary classrooms to say, who would you vote for president? And it's generally a really good indicator because they simply adopt what their parents tell them, right? I see this all the time with my friends' kids, and I have friends that are both Republicans and Democrats. And if you grow up in a Democratic household, you are much more likely as a child to 100% believe and adopt everything your parents are saying. And if you grow up in a Republican household, you are more likely than not to embrace everything that they're doing and saying. And so you too, as a small child, are already a Democrat or a Republican, and there is right and there is wrong. Same with religion. You grow up in a home with a certain religion, and chances are that you believe your religion is right and someone else's is wrong. Or let's say you grew up never going to church and your parents didn't, they were opposed to a religion. You more likely than not are also not religious. If you grew up in a home with a certain faith or a certain practice or how often you go, you probably still think that that's the way to do it. And that's how you're raising your kids. And I'm not saying any of it's wrong. What I'm saying is few of us stop to question whether we agree with it and why. Had you been raised in a different home, you probably would feel completely different about it. So even though you have such a strong conviction as to what is right and wrong, the truth is you just adopted what you were raised in. Like, you're not actually thinking for yourself. And, as I got older, in many ways, I wanted to be a people pleaser. I was a high achiever, but I did not agree with most of the things that were going on around me. And I would go in and out. Sometimes I would agree with it, but it's because I was desperate for approval, right? And so for me, it's easier to see how like sometimes you get away from it and you're like, what in the world? And then you disagree with it, right? But for the most part, I think it's more common that you just continue to move forward with what you learned. So how do you deal with this? How do you decide, well, do I want that value? Do I agree with that rule? And what if I want to stop people pleasing? How do I even go about doing it? Well, first, you just need to know that if you're going to start telling people no, if you're going to start being selfish, you're going to experience some major conflict and inner turmoil. Because when you start to address the disease to please, it challenges everything in your psyche. You are going to start to question your worth as a person. Because even if logically you're like, I don't agree with that anymore, that is going to be so ingrained in you that when you try to push it aside and do things differently, you're going to feel guilty. You're going to feel anxiety. You are going to feel bad about yourself. It's crazy. And I know this from experience because I did a lot of work on trying to deal with my disease to please. And by the way, I'm still working on it. I'm a work in progress. I'm pretty sure I will be a work in progress until I die. But hopefully I'll continue to make great progress. And I feel like, I have made leaps and bounds, even in the last decade or the last few years. But because these ideas are so old and because they are so ingrained, you will be shocked at how it will constantly come up over and over again, and you'll question whether or not you're a good person. And as a heads up, people around you might tell you you're not a good person. This definitely has happened to me. So keep in mind that other people have this is ingrained in them too. So as soon as you start challenging that, it makes them feel uncomfortable too, right? If you're feeling anxiety around it and uncomfortable around it, imagine how it makes someone else feel because you're threatening them. You are threatening their way of life. You are threatening their values. You're threatening their beliefs. And when people feel threatened, they act in all kinds of crazy ways. So, you might not even be prepared for the pushback you're going to get. I know someone, think back to that Goop discussion with Oprah. She was saying that, she was super afraid the first time she said no to someone about their response. And so she had built up in her mind how difficult the conversation was going to be. And the person didn't care at all. They were perfectly nice and fine about it. And she was like, oh, wow, they didn't even care. You will find that is true. Some people don't care, and you just have to say no. But others, they're not going to be able to handle it. They're not going to like it, both because you're saying no to them for the first time, and two, because you are challenging their beliefs and they don't know what to do about that, right? It's very threatening. So just a heads up. It's still worth doing this, though. It's still worth doing this because you can reclaim so much of your life and sanity. All right. So the way that you stop people pleasing, the way that you fully address the disease to please, is to practice. And by practice, I don't mean practice by reading books. I don't mean practice by listening to every podcast out there. I don't mean practice by, role playing or meditating in your mind. That's fine to get started. But at some point, you got to get out on the field and play. And, play is probably not the right word because it's not that fun. But you have to start practicing it. And the more you practice it, the better you get. Okay. So the more you try to stop pleasing, the more you say no, the better you'll get at it. Partly because you'll realize that it's not as big of a deal as you thought. And where it is a big deal, you'll move through that and past that. And once you move through and past it, it is glorious on the other side. But that's really the only way to get good at this, is to just put yourself out there, get super uncomfortable, and try it on for size. And, when you're all upset, in the fetal position crying, and I'm not saying that's happened, but it has, you just deal with it and then you do it again. Okay, so I'm sure you're like, this sounds terrible. I'm not doing it. But once you go through that initial despair, it is so, so much better. Not to mention, you only get one life. And so you can die having pleased others. And if that's what you think you need to do in your life, then that's probably what you should keep doing. Or you can die saying, I lived my life to the fullest and I loved every single minute and every single day because I was true to myself. And that's what I'm aiming for. So if you're aiming for that as well, you want to practice, but here's what you're looking for. Number one, you want to become aware of your people-pleasing desires and fears. A lot of times we don't even know we're doing it. So if you can just kind of watch out for anytime you are doing something, or, you're wanting a promotion or anything, just start checking in with your motives of why. And if it's because you want the affirmation, you want the positive reinforcement from pleasing someone or, pleasing their rules, you can be like, oh, maybe I'm not doing this for myself. Maybe I'm doing this to people please. And then second, you want to become aware of when you say yes anyway. It's one thing to be aware of even having people-pleasing tendencies and your motivation behind your decisions. It's another to be aware of when you say yes despite the knowledge, right? Because you may be like, oh yeah, I'm people-pleasing, but I still have to say yes. I can't say no. Okay, so you got to become aware when you do that. And whether you say yes or no, if you start to feel anxiety, if you start to feel guilt, you got to go deep on the why. That's number 3. You got to peel back those layers. I personally do that through journaling. And, if you hate journaling, talk to a friend, talk to a therapist, but you got to figure out what's going on, because I guarantee you it is something that is deeply, deeply rooted in what you have been taught as to what is right and wrong and what makes you a good or bad person. And you got to figure out what that is so that you can look at it for what it is, right? And that moves into step number 4, which is once you can do that, it allows you to look at it from a new perspective. Now, if it truly is deeply ingrained, that doesn't mean that you're still not going to feel guilty or that you're still not going to feel anxious, but you can at least see it from a logical perspective and say, well, that makes no sense, because that's not even true. I don't think I agree with that. And that can help. Again, it's not going to alleviate the pain, because there's a part of you that's going to be like, but what if I'm wrong? What if they're right and I am a terrible person? I really feel like this stuff gets down into the cellular level, which is why I think disease is actually a really good word for this. But you want to be able to look at it for that new perspective. And then 5, you just got to feel the feels and keep going. So feel the guilt, feel the anxiety, feel the stress, and keep going. When I first started doing this work, I want to give you a quick example. If you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you know that I have this just aversion to where I came from. And so I've stopped going home as much over the years. And one year, by the way, my husband and I are from the same small area. And I was like, because I was working on this. I was actively working on my disease to please. And I said, let's not go in for Thanksgiving this year. Let's go on a vacation. My husband, by the way, also has a disease to please. I was like, we can't do that. I'm like, why can't we do that? Well, what will our families think? And I'm like, well, what does it matter what our families think? He was like, they will be so mad. I'm like, I know they probably will. But what does that, why does their getting mad have to impact us? Now, granted, I'm saying this, but the truth is I'm trying to talk myself into it, giving myself a pep talk. And we went round and round and round about it. And I think he was the one that almost had a full on nervous meltdown as to, we won't be able to survive this. And that's really what happens. We have this really weird reaction on this disease to please. What will our parents think of us? What will our family think of us? What does it mean as a person to choose to go on vacation as opposed to going to visit family? Because we were both raised that makes you a bad person. Family is everything. And if you don't do something like that, you're a bad person. Or that's at least what we thought, right? That was the message we thought we had received. And so that's what we were holding on to. And we did it anyway. And our family was disappointed. They didn't understand. It was hurtful to them. And we went anyway. I think I definitely cried a few tears over that one. There was a lot of journaling over that one. We didn't know if we would survive that one. And yet we did. We had a fabulous vacation, and that was probably 5 or 6 years ago. And we don't go home for Thanksgiving now, and our families totally know we're not coming home. And they don't care anymore. It has nothing to do with us loving them. It has to do with us, taking care of ourselves. We do so much out of obligation, out of this desire to please, even when we get nothing out of it and it doesn't make us happy. And so, if that makes me selfish, fine. I plan to try to have the happiest life I can. Otherwise, just what's the purpose? So if you suffer from the disease to please, you just got to start practicing, and you just have to say no and keep in mind that it's not going to feel good and you might get pushback, but people will learn that you mean it and it won't matter as much. And you'll start to get to figure out what you truly believe and what you don't believe. And I have found that to be extremely freeing for me to get to choose what is my truth and know when things are deeply rooted and not mine. Even though they're still there, I can see them for what they are. And it has made my life just so much easier and more fulfilling to be able to have the power to recognize that that's not mine, that's someone else's. And even if, it's in me on a cellular level, I don't have to allow it to stay there. So I look at it as I'm in remission, but I'm always practicing it. So I hope that you too can start saying no and reclaiming what is good and true for you. Thank you so much for listening today, and I really do hope that you join me for the Get It Done Challenge. I cannot wait. I am so excited. I'm like a kid at Christmas, and I hope you come play with me and join me. Go to getitdonechallenge.com and sign up, and we will play very, very soon. For show notes, downloads, and other free resources, and to keep the conversation going, head on over to hustleandflowpodcast.com. See you there.